there will always be some kinds of disputes that cannot be resolved finally without the involvement of a very strong human element. So I think I don't see the involvement of artificial intelligence, computerization necessarily threatening the legal system in any manner. These are good developments, and I think in due course they will all fall within the right categories of matters that can be dealt with by them. First, as to elaborate what I said earlier, I think the most important thing is that complexity or mastering complex facts is not an end itself. Complexity has to be a path towards simplicity. And if you follow it like that, you always get it right.
Thinking, writing, simplifying complexity, if you really work on these, that serves as a foundation to any work you do.
If you have time, there's something called the cab rank rule, which is followed by barristers in England and applies in India as well. If you have the time and you don't have compelling reasons to say no, you should take up whatever case comes your way on that day.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Chat Masala. Super excited to chat with Gaurav Pachnanda, a senior advocate practicing in the Supreme Court, one of the finest lawyers and legal minds in this country. Welcome, Gaurav.
Thank you very much, Rahul.
Lovely. We're going to get into a lot of details, which will be helpful for aspiring lawyers, but all young people on how you can take your performance to the next level. So let's start with your childhood. You've had quite an interesting journey from Jammu to Oxford, back to Jammu and Delhi. So how did it all begin, and what were some of your inspirations early on in life?
Rahul, I come from a family of doctors, and I think it was always expected within my family that I would grow up to become a doctor and join the family profession. I think when I did not make it to medical school, law was the second best option that I stumbled upon. But largely because my father felt that I had the skills of excelling in this profession, and he encouraged me greatly to join this profession. Having decided that I wanted to pursue a career as a lawyer, I think my passion for the profession and my passion for the law increased day by day. And as I sort of followed the path of going to college in Jammu and then to law school in Jammu, I think it just continued to increase. By the time I had finished law school and was planning to go to Oxford, I think I had a sufficient body of work that could persuade both Oxford University and some scholarship trusts to encourage me to go. And I think that itself was a life-changing experience.
I want to zoom in a little bit into that. When did the thought of studying at Oxford first sprout, and how do you prepare that body of work? How do you prepare your application?
So I think growing up in Jammu, going to Oxford for a post-graduation in law was not even something that had ever crossed my mind or I had ever thought is a practically feasible option for somebody with my background. But I was very fortunate that a teacher who started teaching me in my first year of college started taking a lot of personal interest in my academic development and how I shaped up as a student. And it was his idea, I think, Dr. Kotwal, who used to teach literature, he's the one who inspired me to start building sort of a body of work that would help me apply 5 years later to Oxford. And that association actually has lasted a lifetime. I'm still in touch with him. Wow. He's still one of my...
Is he still with us?
Yes, of course. Oh. And he continues to inspire many youngsters, including my children, still. And I think that was a life-changing experience that's completely changed the direction of where I thought I could go.
When you say body of work, what does that
in terms of, I think when you, for example, as a student in a government college in Jammu, I didn't even know what is it that would matter for the purpose of making an application to Oxford. And for some reason, this professor knew almost everything about it. So in terms of excelling in debates, in terms of writing and getting my writings published, in terms of focusing on developing good writing skills generally, in terms of engagement in discussions, critical analysis, all those things. I think it's in terms of skill set and a body of work, as I said, in terms of published work, in terms of participation in co-curricular activities. He basically guided me in almost everything. Having done all of that, when I say this to my children, they don't believe it. Having done all of that, when it actually came to writing my application and my essay and everything, I think I finished it within one day, started in the morning, and it was all done in the evening.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wonderful. What were those activities? Because I think that'll be really helpful to young people today. What were those activities that really refined, because kind of you're extremely logical and extremely precise in your thinking and communication. What activities would you recommend that young people do today to cultivate similar skills?
I think I think interaction with people, but interaction with minds that challenge you and make you think and develop your own thought process is very important for students. I think what Dr. Kotwal did for me when I was a student in college, he encouraged me to start because he quite easily figured out that I thrive on a discussion, and that is the best way of educating myself. And he encouraged me to start a platform called the Free Thinkers Forum, and he also encouraged me that on a weekly basis or perhaps a fortnightly basis, I should invite some of the sort of intellectual stalwarts on the horizon within my state. And I was very lucky because partly because Dr. Kotwal was very well regarded, and partly because my father was a well-known orthopedic surgeon in the state. I think almost always people would accommodate my requests, and that would end up in an evening interaction for about 2 hours amongst a group of about 20-30 students and this one person having a discussion with us. And it was basically not a speech or a lecture, it was just a discussion.
Kind of like what we're doing here.
Yes, and it was outstanding. And I think that was, as a youngster, it prepared me for a lot of things that were to come in my life later. Yeah.
Amazing. So inviting intellectual stalwarts from different walks of life to really share their wisdom with fellow students.
Yes, journalists, politicians, professionals, anybody who we thought was a thought leader. And we could entice that person to come and spend an evening with us. We did that over a cup of tea. Quite a few of them eventually became ministers. Quite a few of them eventually became even on the national horizon did very well.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
fantastic. Now, what about that transition to Oxford, and how was that? What specifically? How did your mind kind of expand during those years in the UK?
I think when I went to Oxford, I was acutely conscious of the fact that I had come from a very small town, from a relatively smaller, lesser known university. And I think for the first few weeks, I was quite overwhelmed by the environment there, and I was full of self-doubt. But when I look back on the overall experience by the time I graduated and how I have how my life has shaped professionally, I can say with a lot of confidence that I was able to absorb a lot more than so many others who were there with me, because for me, a lot of my professional skills, the foundation of my professional skills is relatable to that period in Oxford, because the system of teaching in Oxford is less focused on classroom teaching and much more focused on a tutorial system, much more focused on an open discussion or a debate across a table. And also, the manner of examination, written examination, is not something that is that is like the traditional question answer system that we see here in our universities and school. An essay that you write for your exam is expected to be an original piece of work or an original thought process in response to a particular question that is expected to evoke a response. So it's even in written work, there's a lot of engagement and leads to a lot of creativity. I think you would have seen a lot of that in your university when you were in the US.
Yes, exactly. So you're saying that that dialogue system, there's not one right answer. It's more original research and original scholarship. That mode of learning appealed to you.
Yes. Also, I think the focus on writing well, the focus on writing simply, and to get your point across in as few words as possible, which eventually, I mean, I'm a great proponent of written advocacy as well as oral advocacy as a tool of courtcraft. And I think eventually, I think not all of it I would have learned in Oxford, but I think the foundation for written advocacy was there, because until then, having gone through the school system and the education system in India, I think there is emphasis, but not as much of emphasis on writing briefly, simply, and analytically, as I found in Oxford. Yes.
Got it. Understood. Would be really interested to learn more about your process of research. I mean, you've been involved in many cases, high-profile cases with high stakes, with people very stressed out on both sides. When you do get a case, how do you begin that research process? Whom do you talk to? Would be very interested to know more about that.
So it's my chambers functions more like a small family, or sort of a group of. So anybody who engages me ends up engaging me and 4 or 5 juniors with me by default. And the thought process is always first me spending time with the facts, the brief, the documents, absorbing it, then spending a bit of time reflecting upon it. And in parallel, my juniors also doing the same thing. And then it becomes a process of, to the outside world, it appears that in a conference I've come up with some good ideas. But in reality, what goes behind it is a lot of engagement, discussion, analysis, research, and then discussion again about cases that we've stumbled upon within my team. So it's a joint combined work product, which makes it quite formidable often.
Now, where do the best ideas come from? Do you sit and meditate on the facts of the case, or is it through this discussion and people bouncing ideas off each other?
I think the best ideas come in the morning when I'm quite relaxed and I'm reflecting on what I'm supposed to do, what should be the right answer to a problem that I'm facing. But the work for those bright ideas to come in the morning is all during the day. So by the time I finish in the evening, a lot of reading would have happened, quite a lot of discussion would have happened. So by the end of the day, often I would go to sleep with a lot of information, a lot of questions, trying to grapple with answers. And sometimes, with God's grace, they come in the morning.
Since we're talking about the morning, so I'd be curious to learn how you structure your day. Like, so when do you wake up in the morning typically?
So I'm not an early riser by nature. If I was to follow my natural instinct, I would almost always rise quite late in the morning, and that's the way I was as a student, right through school. In college, and then even at Oxford, I started reading till very late at night, sometimes till early hours of the morning. And still I would wake up a bit late in the morning. That's because that was consistent with my nature. That's the way it continued for several years of my practice. Almost like nearly 2 decades ago, or maybe 15, 17 years ago, I worked on a series of very important big cases with Lord Goldsmith. And I think, he works both till very late at night and starts still very often quite early in the morning. But I then adapted my style to sort of sleeping early and starting very early in the morning if I'm working on a matter. So if I'm working on a heavy case that requires a lot of reading, I would often sleep by about 10:30 or 11. And averagely, I would wake up at 5:30 in the morning, but sometimes at 4:30 in the morning.
It's quite early.
Yeah.
So you got like a whole period in the morning where you're reflecting on the previous day's inputs, basically your readings, your discussions, everything there.
More particularly for heavy trial work, because I do a fair bit of commercial arbitration work, which is like a full trial, and often if it is before an international tribunal, then to some extent you're dealing with a judge or an arbitrator you know very little about, and anything could be thrown at you as a question. So I think in order to be, sometimes I think the right expression is over-prepared for a trial. I think sometimes you have to spend a lot more time in reflecting and trying to think about answers to questions that might be thrown at you. I think a lot of that happens for me in the morning. For court work that I do in India, sometimes I would have prepared my brief in the evening, but still I wake up in the morning to reflect on it. And almost every time in the morning, you spend much less time on it in going through it, because your mind is quite fresh. It absorbs information very quickly in the early hours of the morning.
I think this is a trend that we're losing, although there are books like the 5 a.m. Club that are advocating that the people wake up earlier and do some of this deep work.
But I must say, because I'm a late riser by nature, I must say that I would have been completely unsuccessful in doing this if it was not for my wife, because invariably she wakes up with me, and just to wake me, I think it's quite an effort to sort of help me sort of get prepared and start reading, and she contributes to it largely. And then to be around for the next 2 or 3 hours if I need, if I ask her to make a cup of tea for me or a cup of coffee. Yeah, so I think it's a joint effort, this starting in the morning.
Of course. Very interesting. Do you have any pre-trial ritual when you're about to show up for a tribunal? Anything you do to put yourself in state when precision is so much the key?
Almost always, I'm not the kind of person who you can feed information or help with preparation or give instructions to at the last minute. Almost always, I think I would have done most of my work several hours in advance. So I don't. I think the best way for me to be prepared, or best way for me to go into court is if I've done my work in advance and I'm just a few hours before that I'm doing nothing else but thinking about how to present my case in court. I think almost always that's the way I do it.
So do you find that almost always you've anticipated every permutation and combination, or how do you plan for the unknown unknowns? If something just turns up that you didn't prepare for, how do you deal with that?
I think the best way to plan for something which is turned up in court and that you don't have an answer to is to be honest, and if you really, despite the best of you, can't find an answer, then I think just to tell the court that you would need some time to reflect on it and perhaps can come back another day. But often one has thought through the case enough to be able to answer the questions that are put to you. But my experience in life is that because the judges on the bench have the benefit of a lot more experience than the lawyers, and then also they look at the papers much more objectively than a lawyer for a particular side does. I think they are almost always, judges would be ahead of lawyers, and they would ask the most pertinent questions that you might have thought through, but every now and then a question comes that you may not have looked at. And if you really can't think of an answer, then be honest and come back rather than not being honest.
Wonderful. I actually want to dig deeper into this because something we want to cultivate in all of our students is that rigor of thought and that objectivity and really considering all sides of an argument. And it's very easy to get caught up in your own bubble, your own perspective. How do you transcend that? Because I think that's something that everyone really needs to learn. How do you really get outside your own skin and see a case from 360 degrees?
I think there is no substitute for labor. So, it's particularly true for my profession. I'm sure it is for most professions. So I think the first step is always to work hard, try to get a hold of all aspects of a case. The second, of course, is make time for thinking, so that you reflect and are able to come up with some original thoughts. And I think the third, which is the most important, which I keep telling my juniors, is to try to break down complex facts and complex propositions into something that is simple, because most complex disputes, most complex problems have a very simple foundation. And if you've understood the simple foundation, then the answer is very simple. And if you put the answer simply before a court or a judge, often it is easier to reach the right decision in terms of giving a judgment.
Is there something that young people can do to begin to cultivate that skill? It seems like it started with your college in Jammu, got refined at Oxford, and it's something you continue to practice to this day, taking complexity and breaking it down into simplicity. Any way a young person who wants to move in that direction can get started?
I think the first, to elaborate what I said earlier, I think the most important thing is that complexity or mastering complex facts is not an end itself. Complexity has to be a path towards simplicity. And if you follow it like that, you always get it right. I often see, and I keep telling a lot of my juniors also, don't fall in love with your mastery over the complex aspects of this case. The idea is to then transcend complexity and give a simple answer to what the problem is. So I think if you look at complexity and your effort at mastering complexity as a path to reaching a simple answer, in my profession as an advocate, it can be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. I think it transcends your profession even. I think the capacity, whether it's in theoretical physics or consulting, a wide range of fields, I think there's a need for that capacity to.
Now I think a lot of our court proceedings can be seen on the internet. I think there are. So if you watch a court proceeding, a very complex matter is argued by two lawyers over hours and hours and hours, and sometimes you will see that the bench or the judge will only ask one simple question, or maybe two simple questions. And you will discover that eventually that entire case turns on those two simple questions. But if in the process of preparing for that case, the advocate or the lawyer has not really thought about the answer to those two simple questions, then all the mastery over complexity is of no help. So ultimately, I think the idea is really, as I said, the pursuit of simplicity or simple answers through the process of complexity.
I think this also holds in business. I'll give you an example. I've seen a lot of startup pitches, and they'll say, "Oh wow, we've got this technology and that technology, and we made this algorithm, and there are 20 different slides." And good VCs will ask, "What problem are you solving? What is the pain point? Who is your customer? Let me visualize them." And I think that seems to be exactly what great judges do as well. Okay, I get the big picture, but let's cut to the essence. So I think what I'm hearing is ask those simple, profound questions, and don't be satisfied until you have those crystal clear responses.
Yes, that's what I think as well.
Okay, lovely. Very interesting. One thing is, how much time do you spend kind of discussing and contemplating the merits of the case specifically, and do the specifics of the opposing counsel, the judge, the court, and those characteristics also come into play? Is that something you strategize about?
I think even if you don't consciously think about it, I think with experience what happens is that you are able to even intuitively, you are able to assess as to what kind of questions would come from a particular judge or a particular bench, because you've seen that judge or that bench do that morning till evening in cases and cases together. I think that happens instinctively and intuitively. And I think the same analysis would hold true for opposing counsel. One can even make an effort to preempt or guess as to what the other side's strategy would be. But the most interesting thing about the court process is that it never stops surprising you, and you may have done the best of it, whether instinctively, intuitively, or even consciously. The bench can put a question to you that you may have never thought about, or the other side may come up with a strategy that you may have never thought about at all. So that's the other interesting thing about our profession. I think no two cases are alike, and there's a freshness associated with every day that you spend in court or before a tribunal.
Definitely. If things don't go well and a result doesn't go your way, how do you bounce back, especially when it might be a high-profile case and a lot on the line? I can imagine, a loss like that is equal to what an athlete feels, losing a big game. How do you bounce back from that?
I think that's my answer to that question would be more personal in nature. I think if I have done my best, then it doesn't impact me too much. It does impact me, but not so much. If I feel that I could have done something differently that I should have done or could have impacted the outcome, then I'd be very uncomfortable and unhappy about it. If I've really done my best, then I think there is some degree of detachment with the outcome of the case that I have. As long as I have... Sometimes one might feel that even if I have done my best and the result is not to my liking, it is in fact not the correct result. So one does wonder in those cases or in those situations as to how that principle or those facts would get corrected before a higher court or whatever. But as long as I've done my best, I think I'm quite detached from the outcome. One thing that I have learned with so many years of experience is that generally, no matter how passionate one is about a cause as a lawyer, in most cases, by the time justice is dispensed, in most cases, it is the correct answer and the correct manner of dealing with the problem in the facts of a particular case, and it is something that you can live with, and it is something that should become the end of a long drawn dispute, I think.
Got it. Very interesting. Alrighty. Want to get into kind of more direct advice for young people who are contemplating law as a career. Now, big picture, there's corporate law and litigation, and then there are further subdivisions. To a young person, how would you encourage them to think and structure their path into this industry?
I think one lesson that I have learned from my life is not to plan too much too soon about how you want to plan your career as a lawyer. I think the most important thing is to start by acquiring the right skills, become a thinker, become somebody who can write very, very well, who can simplify problems, become somebody who can absorb information, analyze it. And then as you progress in the profession, you will find your way. You will discover as to what part of the law attracts you more. Friends of mine who were at Oxford with me would tell you that I showed no inclination towards commercial law when I was at Oxford. In fact, I thought that one or two of the very sort of well-known, prominent commercial law subjects there would be too hard for me, and I steered away. And in the end, that's the only kind of work that I do. And all the subjects at least half the subjects that I studied in Oxford, I may have some element of that branch of law in my practice, and occasionally I appear in those matters and I enjoy it. But really, my passion is commercial law, and it is a result of a path that I followed, and it took about 15 years in the profession for me to discover that this is what I want to do mostly.
Got it. So it wasn't like I sit down, I have a spreadsheet, I contemplate the pros and cons. It's commercial law. It was a more organic path.
I think it can't be mechanical because it's such an intellectually stimulating, challenging profession that if you give your heart, soul, and mind to it, it is not something that you can decide at the outset as to which branch of law will satisfy you. There will be cases where I think you could decide at the outset because you always had the information, and sometimes that passion might last throughout your career. But there will also be cases where you start with falling in love with a particular branch of law, but over the years you discover another branch of law and do very well in that as well.
Got it. But I think the important point that I want everyone to take home is really focus on those fundamental skills in any discipline. I remember I was watching a documentary on Michael Jordan, and everyone sees him flying through the air. But when you ask him, what do you focus on? He's like, I focus on balance, I focus on core strength, I focus on free throws, really the fundamentals, and that's what allows you to do the more complex work. So you said thinking, writing, simplifying complexity. If you really work on these, that serves as a foundation to any work you do in the future.
Yeah, I think, I don't remember which book I read this in many years ago, is that Motilal Nehru, who was the leading civil lawyer in Allahabad of his generation, he was once instructed in a criminal matter, and the instructing lawyer, or one very prominent lawyer or judge, eventually wrote about this incident in his autobiography or a book or something. He said that he was the finest criminal lawyer that I have seen. So I one day asked him that the bulk of your practice is civil law, but you've been instructed by this prince or this Raja to come and sort of appear in a criminal matter, and how are you doing it so well? And he says, ultimately, I'm just a lawyer and I just love the law. And I don't see this distinction between civil law, criminal law. The facts of this case attracted me, and it took me some time to understand what the principles of law applicable to these facts in a criminal matter were. And he just enjoyed practicing his art.
Very interesting. He didn't create these distinctions that we do.
Yeah. So, I'm essentially a commercial lawyer. I enjoy commercial, representing clients in commercial disputes. But every now and then a patent litigation comes up, which is supposed to be very technical and a super specialized branch of law. But if the science involved in that attracts me, I would often clear up my calendar for a few days, try to come up to speed with that. And I find it very challenging. And at the end of it, I don't see myself as doing something which is very different from any other branch of law. Although somebody else might think that I have moved from one specialization to another for that one case. But I don't see myself doing it.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
How do you select cases? And at any given point in time, how many cases do you have in the air?
I think my peers and my colleagues would agree with me. I generally take I'm very selective about the volume of work that I take on. My principle is that I try not to take on more than what I can justify or do my best in. It's very difficult to talk about a number because number may vary depending upon number. Sometimes on on a miscellaneous day in the Supreme Court, the cases need not take so much of time in preparation, so you might take more work on that day. So I don't think it's difficult. I don't think it's easy to give a number. But how do I select my cases? The general principle is if you have time, there's something called the cab rank rule, which is followed by barristers in England and applies in India as well. If you have the time and you don't have compelling reasons to say no, you should take up whatever case comes your way on that day. Generally, I think if I would try to do a case, even if I'm busy, even if I have to make extra time for it, and even if sometimes the fee marked is not something that I would normally charge, but is much less, if there is an issue that attracts me. So I think if there is something of interest in a case, I would do it no matter what. But if there is something, I would say no to a case if I think there is some dishonesty or ethically improper conduct or something really not right that I should appear in that case for.
And what do you mean by something that interests you? What are some of the things that interest you?
I think legal propositions, questions of law, something where you can stretch the envelope, something where you can come up with something new. I recently appeared in a case, and on a no-names basis, I will tell you. I recently appeared in a case in which the application made by the client was something that was out of the ordinary, and I sensed that the nature of arguments that were being made in that application broadly, some of them could be termed as improper. And my first view was that I will not appear in this matter. But there were two very interesting legal points in that application, pure questions of law. And the solicitors agreed with me when I said that I will only argue on these points and nothing else. And we argued it, and it was something that I found it intellectually very stimulating. And we started by telling the court that we are not pursuing all the other irrelevant issues which may not be proper, but there are two pure questions of law. And yeah, we got a very good hearing. We don't know the outcome, we got a very good hearing. And those are things that attract me.
By pure questions of law, you mean like like the philosophy of law?
Yeah.
You're questioning
that application itself was based on some questions of law as to the manner in which principles of law should apply to the facts of the case.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Switching gears here, zooming out. What's one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were a 20-year-old?
As a lawyer or generally?
Generally, or as a lawyer. Both.
If you've done your best, then whatever happens, it does not matter.
Mm-hmm. That level of detachment. Okay.
Also, you can have attachment with only things that are within your control, and how you work hard, what you do with what is within your means is all that matters. The outcome does not matter. A bad result does not matter. A good result does not matter. It's in my profession, at least, it's always you would end up judging a lawyer not based on one day's performance, but over large spells, years, sometimes decades, sometimes 5-year intervals. Mm-hmm. So in my profession, I think one should be able to, as a youngster, one should be able to understand that a day does not matter, one case does not matter. Whether you work hard on a consistent basis, whether you're always at your best, whether you are a person of integrity in court, those things matter. And they matter over a long period of time.
Amazing. Lovely. Speaking of detachment, have there been any cases that have changed your life or your views, or one that really affected you personally over the years?
As I said, I look at all cases and outcome of a case with a certain degree of detachment, but there have been cases that have impacted my life in the sense that either the other side's lawyer or a lawyer that I was working with or a judge that I was before made me look at some aspects of either the law or my profession in different manner, or challenged me to grow. I think in that sense, I have had the good fortune at several stages in my life of being involved in cases that have had that kind of impact.
Amazing. Okay, we've got some more rapid fire questions here. What's the most used app on your phone?
The calendar.
Calendar. Ooh, Didn't expect that one. What musical genre do you love listening to?
I love folk music of all kinds.
Okay. Any particular region?
I come from Jammu, but I'm very conscious of my Punjabi identity, and there is a lot of Sufi music within Punjabi folk music. I think that attracts me, touches my soul.
Wow. I'm gonna check that out. Any favorite sport?
I'm not into sports that much. I've never played a sport, but over the last few years, I really enjoy spending time on my rowing machine.
Ooh, very interesting. Any other? How do you recharge yourself at the end of a day and all this intellectual work? What's that? What's your battery?
Sometimes, if it's one is music and two is sleep, a good night's sleep.
Of course. Got it. Lovely. I know we touched upon this, but just to kind of highlight them, what are 3 skills you believe young people should focus on early in life?
Hard work, thinking, and integrity.
Oh, amazing. What's one value that you hold really dear?
Friendship.
Friendship. Lovely. Excellence is blank.
Excellence is tough question. I think excellence is a result of constant growth, constant work, and is not static.
How do you combat complacency? You know, when you reach a certain level of success, what keeps you going? What drives you? To continue to challenge yourself. Where does that come from?
I think in me as a lawyer, I think it's the result of a foundation that was laid at this beginning of my profession, and that's the manner in which I have evolved. I just can't do otherwise in any other manner. So I think if there is a brief that I have to work on, there is almost always a subconscious desire to do my best in it. I mean, I don't need to tell myself this is the case that I'm going to do my best in, but I think it becomes a habit.
It's a matter of identity. Like, this is who I am.
It's also a matter of identity, and it's also a matter of faith as well, I think, in your profession. I think it's almost like a doctor. Every time a surgeon operates, he wants to cure, or he wants to heal, or he wants to prevent death, give life. I think it's in my profession, the idea is because anything can happen during the course of a hearing, the effort is always to be in a position to assist in a manner that you haven't overlooked a particular aspect or have not really let down a cause.
So in a sense, that comes full circle with your parents wanting you to be a doctor, but I think that the ethos that motivates you is very similar to that of a medical practitioner.
I think so. And in my case, I think it is also because I think as a lawyer, I think different people might perceive their roles differently. As a lawyer, I see myself constantly as a student who's trying to learn, and that approach always, it's not an effort to do my best, but the effort is to learn, and I think in that effort you try to do your best.
Okay. Speaking of, I just thought of something. Speaking of learning and disruptions, with ChatGPT coming on, do you see that changing the legal field or how you go about your business?
I haven't experimented with it, but I think there will, over time, there will always be some kinds of disputes which can be decided in more or less a mechanical manner. For example, if I have a claim of 5,000 rupees against a person who's of a similar financial background as me, and that claim was to be decided based on the throw of a dice, I would accept an outcome to attach finality with it no matter where it sort of no matter in what manner it is decided. There is a larger public policy involved in just bringing finality to smaller disputes that don't need to load the system. There are more serious causes that require greater reflection and greater involvement within the system. So I think there will be some kinds of disputes that might end up going through a more I don't know whether mechanical is the right word, but in a more automated process of decision making. But there will always be some kinds of disputes that cannot be resolved finally without the involvement of a very strong human element. So I think I don't see the involvement of artificial intelligence, computerization necessarily threatening the legal system in any manner. These are good developments, and I think in due course they will all fall within the right categories of matters that can be dealt with by them.
And that can really help people get justice in a more expedited and efficient manner.
Yeah.
Got it. Last question, or signature question: what would you like to see in the world or in India in 2035, about a decade from now?
In my profession, I mean, there are so many aspirations that one can talk about. In my profession, not even in 2035, even in 2030, I would like to see the revival of a civil trial in court. I think because of the overload of our system, the civil trial has become very, very slow, and in some sense, it is if not dead, it is being compromised. And I think I would be very happy to see the civil trial revived within our court system. And I think that would have two consequences. I think that would have the effect of bringing our legal system more at par with other jurisdictions that are doing slightly better than us in commercial matters. That is one issue. And the other, I think it's very important, as there is greater globalization within the profession. I think the skills that are involved in a civil trial are specialized skills, cross-examination, for example. And I don't see, I see those skills becoming less common amongst young lawyers now. And I think that change is something that would make me personally very happy.
Which skills specifically?
Cross-examination.
Which are more specialized?
In trials.
In trials, okay.
Yeah. A lot of our appellate advocacy in the Supreme Court, for example, is just oral advocacy on points of law, where all the facts are already decided. And a lot of our younger lawyers are very attracted by just the appellate advocacy or oral advocacy. But the process of deciding facts and reaching the truth is really a process that goes through a trial where you give evidence and then witnesses are examined and cross-examined. Of course, it happens in our system. There are criminal trials and there are civil trials, but because of the overload in terms of number of cases within our system, I think the process of the slowing down of trials has resulted, I think, in some manner of compromising the sort of the trials per se.
Got it. Okay. Lovely. Thank you so much, Gaurav. Enlightening conversation.
Thank you. Very interesting conversation.
Thank you so
very
much.
Thank you.